All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Every time I look into your lovely eyes, I see a love that money just can't buy. One look from you, I drift away. I pray that you are here to stay. Anything you want, you got it. Anything you need.
And welcome back to hour two of tonight's show. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from the broadcast center of the X Zone Radio Show, and you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Lisa Story, and we had the opportunity of having Lisa on the show a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago by now, and we're going to be talking to Lisa about the D.B. Cooper story. And joining me now is Lisa Story. Lisa, thanks very much for coming back on, because we had a lot of listeners say, can we get more of that lady who talked about the guy who jumped from the airplane?
Oh, great. No, I'm so glad people are still interested. It's been 50 years, the only unsolved hijacking in the United States, and it's surprising that people still care about the story.
Well, I think the fact is that it has so much involved. And,
right.
You know, like, basically no one got hurt.
Right.
And it's like...
Physically, anyway.
Physically, right. Physically. And why don't you tell the story about how you got involved in this story? Well, why don't we just go back to the D.B. Cooper story itself? Okay,
let me start there.
Okay.
Just a brief rundown for those who don't know. In 1971, by this time, there had already been about 250 hijackings in the United States, but every single person had been captured. And a lot of them were take me to Cuba, or they were just ransom, I want money. And so in November 24th, the day before Thanksgiving, 1971, a very nondescript man got on an airplane, put on a pair of sunglasses, and slipped the flight attendant a note. And at first she didn't open it because she thought, like most men and flight attendants back then, that he was just flirting with her, and she had no time for that, right?
Yeah.
So before the plane even took off, he kept looking at her, and she realized he wanted her to open the note. So she did.
Right.
And it said, Miss, I have a bomb. Come sit next to me. So this was Florence Schaffner. She sat next to him, asked, are you serious? He said, I'm serious. And then the other flight attendant came down the aisle, Tina Mucklow. And Florence was, so afraid and scared, she, dropped the note. She couldn't speak. So Tina picked it up and went to the back phone and called the crew. So then Florence went into the cockpit, and Tina sat next to the hijacker, who asked for $200,000 cash and a couple of parachutes. And the plane was going from Portland, Oregon to Seattle. Once it landed in Seattle, they loaded up the money. They brought the money on board. He let the passengers go. They brought on the parachutes. And then most of the flight attendants, except for Tina, stayed on the plane. And of course, the two pilots and the flight engineer. Almost immediately after taking off, he had wanted to open one of the stairways. The plane was a 727, and it happened to have a rear stairwell. So he asked Tina Mucklow to help him open it, and she's like, the directions are on the door. I don't want to get sucked out. She was basically afraid she'd be sucked out. So he sent her to the cockpit, and at some point they felt an oscillation, and they believed that was when he climbed down the stairs and jumped. And then he was never heard from again. And the closest they came to hearing from him again was 3 packs of money were found kind of 40 miles off the flight path in a place called Tina Bar. And the money was stacked one on top of each other and very close to the surface. But where it was found, it had to have been placed there within the past year because it had rubber bands, which it didn't have when it was on the airplane. It did not have rubber bands on it. It had paper bands. And the rubber would have not lasted more than a year. Plus the area it had been found had been dredged a few years before. So it would have been torn to bits, had it been not put there. But that's it. They have no hard evidence, really, because the cigarette butts that they collected, the FBI threw away. They did collect a tie. They think it was his. But not only did several people handle it in the days before DNA was used in crimes, but the FBI, one of the agents, gave it out to citizen sleuths to handle. And so now you don't know if people have planted evidence or if they've also not handled it well, but that's about it. And they had one hair that they think might have been his. No fingerprints, nothing. And he just disappeared. They never found his parachute, the money. And so I think most people think he did survive, but there are a few who think he did not.
All right. So what is your connection to all of this?
So I knew about the story generally. I wasn't really all that interested in it. And one of my uncle's friends who was calling me for information, he had written a draft book about my uncle called Pardon Me, Father, about my uncle's diamond mining days in the 1980s. And his name's Carl. Carl had called me for information and had started writing to me, especially my uncle had gotten really ill. Oh. And he wanted to make sure my uncle was okay. And he started hinting in his letters that my uncle was D.B. Cooper. And I just thought he was maybe exaggerating. But then we had a couple phone conversations. And what he said was that he knew from the night it happened, it was my uncle. And he called him because my uncle was in Washington, living in Washington at the time. And he said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Hung up and wouldn't speak to him again for 15 years. And of course, my uncle had been destitute poor at the time of the hijacking, had been evicted, was scraping by. And then afterwards, he bought a house cash and he was then sent overseas. And was working overseas. But Carl was kind of giving me hints and different hints. And finally we had the conversation. But when I would visit with my uncle and ask him, he wouldn't say it was not him, but he wouldn't say it was. And so the closest he came was, and just to go back really quickly, Carl started tape recording their phone calls in 2008 and recording them. And there are details shared about the hijacking in 2008 that were not released to the public until 2012. So we have that on recording, we have that recording of my uncle talking about it. And at the same time, some of the things he said didn't match up with the hijacking because he said 40 years later, who can remember every detail, he was so afraid. But the first time he admitted to me that he was D.B. Cooper was in 2011. A young lady named Marla Cooper had gone to the FBI and said she thought it was her uncle. So I guess, I have that going for me. I'm one of the other nieces, D.B. Cooper nieces. And he sent me a copy of her article of her coming out and saying it was her uncle. The FBI did a DNA match to what, I don't know what they had as DNA, but they said it was not a match, but that doesn't mean anything. The tie could have come from a thrift store. And he wrote a really snarky note, like, that would have made Marla 6 years old at the time, a real live Nancy Drew. And then he also wrote on the side, "You'd be really proud of me," and why they found no fingerprints. So that was the first time he admitted, because he knew I was talking to Carl. He knew Carl had told me, and Carl was sending me letters and papers and that type of thing. But then when we finally had a full discussion was in August 2013, about 6 months before he passed away. He asked me to take all of his files. He had kept files from when he was trying to recruit into the CIA. He had the letter from the CIA. He had his Army intelligence and all of his papers. And he had me go to the back of his roll-top desk and pull off an envelope from behind a secret panel. And inside that were all kinds of documents and information, including a KGB ID. And so he also had me grab this envelope that Carl had sent him. And over the course of several years, when they were talking about the hijacking, what Carl did was type up a written like testament, last will and testament, and his confession. But it wasn't, Walt didn't write it himself. My uncle didn't write it. Carl wrote it for him. So I think some things are like go back and forth in story format versus I did this, I did that type of thing. But Walt said, I'll sign this. Can you take it into town and get it notarized? And I said, no, you have to come with me. That's how a notary works. He goes,
right,
well,
exactly.
Right? So he said, and he was really ill at this point. He was on oxygen and he wasn't very mobile and he wasn't sure. And I said, well, I can get a notary to come to your house. But as I read it, the first note said all of these, it had like 6 different social security numbers he had, including some a social security number in Canada, in Saudi Arabia, and 3 or 4 for the US. And it had all of these different aliases he had gone by, including DB Cooper. And then I said, you're finally telling me? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, why now? He goes, well, because I'm going to die. And I'm like, well, you've said that before. For the past couple of years, you said you were going to die. And he said, well, I mean it this time. So I read it as quickly as I could because it was very long. And I asked him some questions, but basically, I wish I had more time and could ask him more, because the more I got into the story, the more I wanted to know. Because at this time, I really wasn't an expert on the hijacking and, where people were trying to prove or not prove a suspect. But I asked him why he did it. And he said, he had robbed a Bob's Big Boy in 1965 and shared some of the money with the pretty female manager and the patrons. But that was the first time he was arrested as an adult and faced serious jail sentence. So he skipped town, and after that, he just had one bad break after another. It's hard to make a good living when you're on the run.
Yeah.
And so he just said at that point thought he was better dead than poor. And he didn't care if he lived or died, but he thought if he made some money, at least his family, he could buy a house finally for his wife.
Lisa, stand by. We've got to take our first break. X Zone Nation, the story of D.B. Cooper. Fascinating story told by his niece, Lisa Story. And Lisa and I will be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. And I'm here Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight. Don't go away.
To stay. Anything you want, you got it. Anything you need, you got it. Is it loving in your eyes all the way? If I listen to your lies, would you say I'm a man without conviction? I'm a man who doesn't know how to sell a contradiction. You come and go, you come and go. Come, chameleon.
And our guest this hour is Lisa Story, and we're talking about the D.B. Cooper case that was when somebody allegedly jumped out of the back of a, let me see if my memory serves me correct, a Northwest Airlines Flight 305.
Correct.
And
Yes.
was never found. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think the case is unsolved because the FBI couldn't find the hijacker? Or is it unsolved because authorities didn't want to find him, considering there's direct connections with the CIA as well as the KGB and all these different identities?
Yeah, I don't know if the FBI was in on it, but I do think there was some cover up maybe behind the scenes because what Walt told me was that he was found. He was approached a few months later on the job site, and by some guys he thought were, fellow iron workers, and they took him out for a beer, and they basically said, "We know what you did. Do you want to go to jail?" And he said no, and he goes, "Well, then you work for us. You'll be hearing from us." And then here's a guy with, he has a, you know, somewhat of a, couple armed robberies and all of that, but this was pretty big. And he had been working for a company called Vanell. And Vanell there are a couple books you can read about them, but they're very well known in the Middle East. They had done some CIA contracts flying 727s and dropping supplies and stuff out of the back and everything in Vietnam for the CIA, as did Air America. And they were working on some Middle East government contracts and some CIA contracts. And Walt had applied to the CIA in the early 60s, but was rejected because because of his criminal background and a couple things that happened. But the recruiter stayed in contact with him. And he's like, "We can use people like you." And my uncle had about 12 years of military training, paramilitary, Air Force search and rescue, Army intelligence, paratroopers, that type of thing. So he was working for Vanell on the Grand Coulee Dam, and his recruiter kept telling him, "Hold on, the contracts are coming, the contracts are coming." And that's when he just had no patience. He went and hijacked a plane. And there are records that show that the CIA was talking to Boeing at the time of the hijacking because they were trying to find out for the pilots if the plane could take off with the rear stairs down. And of course, the CIA knew they could because they had flown 727s in Vietnam. So what Walt said was after that, he was flying to and from Boise, Idaho for a couple years, getting training. And then he spent the next 15 overseas working for, he was on the Saudi Royal Family Guard, training their military through Vanell. He responded to he went to Mecca when the Grand Mosque was overtaken by terrorists, and he had to convert to Islam for the day, to go even step foot in the city. And he just did a variety of things. He has several U.S. Foreign Service passport or identifications where he was fighting rebels in Algeria and that type of thing. So to go back to your question, I think he had help. Well, and he had help by his contact laundering the money through Canada, through a Canadian bank. So I think the CIA knew who he was. Whether or not the FBI did, I don't know.
Okay, so how much money is he allegedly supposed to have stolen and gotten away with?
So he jumped out of the plane with $200,000. I don't know if all of it made it to the ground with him. We kind of didn't talk about how much. I mean, I didn't get into that level of discussions with him because there was so much to talk about.
Sure.
But he did have, when we went to his one Canadian bank, he did have tens of thousands of dollars in a safe deposit box in gold coins that we saw. And his bank balance was over $100,000 years later. Now, whether that was from investments in the diamond mining he did or leftovers from the hijacking, I don't know, but the hijacker, and of course I think it's Walt, had jumped out of the plane with $200,000.
Here we are.
And he did, I was just going to say, he did buy a house 4 months later with cash, and we were able to track down the landlord, the man who sold him the house, and he remembered Walt because he was very polite. And that's something the flight attendant said about the hijacker. He was extremely polite, and just very polite towards them, especially the ladies. But he said, I remembered him because he was so polite. He paid cash. He paid off the house in cash within a couple years. And I asked for all cash payments and he had no problem making it. And this is a man who had been evicted from a trailer just a year before because he couldn't afford $60 a month.
Something doesn't sound right, does it?
No.
Now, with all the evidence that you were able to dig up, as well as the other members of the sleuthing society, is this case still open?
Oh, it absolutely is. And I have to tell you, the people who are the experts that are on the different chat groups and Facebook groups do not think it's my uncle. And because the flight path where his friend, he didn't remember where he landed, but he remembered things about like physical description and the freeways he took home. He remembers limping into a cafe. There was a lumber dump truck and a guy with a cowboy hat and a guitar sitting there. And he asked this guy, he called him Cowboy, to give his friend Don directions to pick him up. And Carl was a pilot, and he took out his flight maps. And based on how my uncle said he got home, how long it took him to get through a certain pass, they were able to trace that flight path. And, they didn't really know where they were that night. Supposedly, the McCord Air Force Base came up with the flight path based on the jets. But the jets, and this is in the FBI documents, the jets that were following the plane lost it almost immediately because the commercial 727 was going much slower than the Air Force jets. They didn't catch up with the plane until almost Portland. So anyway, I think the main reason is the flight path doesn't align. But, even the co-pilot said at one of the FBI agent, Ralph Himmelbach's retirement party, he said that the flight path was off, that they were much further southeast than the flight path that's stated. But I think also people have in this sleuthing group, they have their own favorite suspect. And there are a handful of people who really want to be the ones that solve this case. And I think if they do, they'll be able to get a television show or, some notoriety there, maybe make a living off this. For most people, there's no money to be made, including for me.
Sure.
But it's interesting, but they really, really don't like Walt. And in any group, whenever people are starting to say, oh, wait a minute, oh, D.B. Cooper handed cash to one of the flight attendants, a packet of money, and said, thanks for being nice to me. And he said the same thing. And I have documentation before 1971 in his own handwriting that he handed cash during the Big Boy robbery to somebody. I have his diary writings about how being polite is so important. And, all three flight attendants said how polite he was. Some of these characteristics, things that he said, I have in letters, similar language that he used when he addressed my mom and I, young ladies, whatever you girls would like, and things that he said to the flight attendants, right? So, no, it's not solved. I think there's been a big push to try to get this solved this year. But every lead that they've kind of put out there, like, minute dust particles on the tie might show that they only came from one plant in the whole United States from 1971. Things are not kind of panning out. So
why is it so important to solve the case this year?
I don't know, but there's just been a huge push among them. But unless there is relevant DNA that you can prove hasn't been planted, like I wouldn't believe the results of the DNA test on the tie unless it came from the FBI. And I can be assured that nobody meddled with the tie, right? Because it has been outside of the FBI's evidence storage.
The chain of
handed it to citizens.
All right. So what you're saying is that the evidence chain of custody has been broken.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to say. I couldn't find the words.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how can they use that?
I don't know. I mean, and more than likely the DNA, when they were collecting back then, I don't even know if the FBI agents were wearing gloves, right? But who knows? Maybe Walt's DNA is on that tie, and then I will be eating these words. But I don't know. It's just hard to tell. It's hard to tell whose DNA. But
Well-
the basic, what the FBI found 20 years ago when they first did it is it has the DNA of 3 different men on it.
All right, so even if they did bring it to an outside lab and they said, yes, there is that DNA on it, that wouldn't hold up very far because the chain of custody of the evidence has been broken.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody would, unless it supported your suspect, you'd be like, this solves the case. But I think for a lot of other people, they'd wonder, well, did you track down a relative and plant that evidence so that you could solve the case and have your own television show, right? You would have to know, like, was it a completely person out of left field? Like I said, a lot of the people in the DB Cooper world, because the flight path doesn't align perfectly, they don't believe it's my uncle.
Strange, really strange case. And you and I will be back after this short commercial break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us tonight on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and we're streaming around the world on classic1220.ca. If you'd like to get more information on the DB Cooper story, visit www.facebook.com/DB Cooper story. And there's still so much more to come on this case. Why is it so important this year? We'll ask these questions and more. So whatever you do, don't go away. We'll be back right after this short break.
Happy Chinese New Year to Rob McConnell and all the members of the X Zone Nation, from all your friends and listeners in China. 2024 is the year of the dragon. If you were born in 1928, 1940, 1952, 1964, 1976, 1988, 2000, 2012, or 2024, this is your year. And Rob McConnell, since you were born in 1952, this is your year, the year of the dragon. You are charismatic, sincere, and ambitious. Dragons are courageous leaders who always love a challenge. For all dragons, your outlook for 2024 is that this year will bring you good luck. You will flourish in your relationships and career. If you were born in 1929, 1941, 1953, 1965, 1977, 1989, 2001, or 2013, your sign is the snake. You are perceptive, intelligent, and composed. Snakes are motivated and can carry out any task from beginning to end. For the snake, your outlook for 2024 snake is that this year you will face all challenges head on. Proactive planning will bring you closer to your goals. If you were born in 1930, 1942, 1954, 1966, 1978, 1990, 2002 or 2014, you are the horse. You are energetic, cheerful, and sociable. Horses are observant and enjoy excitement. For the horse, your outlook for 2024 is that hard work will help you to overcome obstacles and achieve success. Play to your strengths and you will prosper. If you were born in 1931, 1943, 1955, 1967, 1979, 1991, 2003, or 2015, your sign is the ram. You are considerate, creative, and attentive. Goats are gentle and determined to succeed. For the ram, your outlook for 2024 is that this year will bring you everything you need. confidently stride towards your goals and prosperity will come to you. If you were born in 1932, 1944, 1956, 1968, 1980, 1992, 2004, or 2016, your sign is the monkey. You are sensible, thoughtful, and fearless. Monkeys are insightful and are quick to find a solution in difficult situations. For the snake, your outlook for 2024 is that this year will bring you wealth. Displaying your talents in your career will produce extraordinary results. If you were born in 1933, 1945, 1957, 1969, 1981, 1993, 2005, or 2017, your sign is the rooster. You are trustworthy, compassionate, and smart. Roosters have remarkable eloquence and are great communicators. For the rooster, your outlook for 2024 will bring you good luck in your relationships. Surround yourself with the company of those you love the most. If you were born in 1934, 1946, 1958, 1970, 1982, 1994, 2006, or 2018, your sign is the dog. You are loyal, patient, and dependable. Dogs are intuitive and inspire confidence in others. For the dog, your outlook for 2024 is to remain focused to reach the light at the end of the tunnel. Keep pushing forward and you will receive prosperity. If you were born in 1935, 1947, 1959, 1971, 1983, 1995, 2007, or 2019, your sign is the pig. The pig is hardworking, amicable, and earnest. Pigs are enthusiastic and are always ready to give a helping hand. For the pig, your outlook for 2024 is that you will prosper in the new year by making new connections. Remember to think before you act. If you were born in 1937, 1949, 1961, 1973, 1985, 1997, 2009, or 2021, your sign is the ox. You are reliable, honest, and responsible. Oxen are diligent and work hard in everything they do. For the rat, your outlook for 2024 is now is the time to slow down and reflect. You will benefit by creating a balance in all aspects of life. If you were born in 1938, 1950, 1962, 1974, 1986, 1998, 2010, or 2022, your sign is the tiger. You are adventurous, passionate, and generous. Tigers are confident individuals with a strong sense of justice. For the tiger, your outlook for 2024 is that this year will bring you prosperity. Seize new opportunities to achieve success. If you were born in 1939, 1951, 1963, 1975, 1987, 1999, 2011, or 2023, your sign is the rabbit. You are kind-hearted, optimistic, and clever. Rabbits are witty and elegant in nature. For the rabbit, your outlook for 2024 is that hard work will bring you abundance. Remember to stop and appreciate auspicious moments along the way. Happy Chinese New Year to one and all. For the X Zone Broadcast Network and the X Zone Radio and TV show in Hong Kong, I am Wang Jing. Visit us online at www.xzbn.net. A division of Rama McConnell Media Company in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. www.realmar.com.
Welcome back, everyone. We're talking about the D.B. Cooper case this hour with our very special guest and the niece of the person who she believes to be D.B. Cooper, her uncle. And first of all, Lisa, as we were in the commercial break and doing that feature, I had a thought that you were saying that the case with the FBI was still open, right?
About 18 months after my uncle passed away.
Okay.
So it was closed in 2016.
Oh, it's closed. Now, when was the evidence released that this tie that the D.B. Cooper Sleuthing Association, for a lack of better title, are trying to say that, no, based on the DNA that they believe to be on this tie, that proves that your uncle would not be D.B. Cooper?
Well, they haven't checked the DNA to my uncle's DNA. So they wouldn't even know. They have their own candidates or suspects that they really think it is. So I don't know, like, if they could get somebody to do the DNA test, it's quite expensive. I guess it's well over, it's like $50,000 or something to do a really good test. And it's been 50 years. I don't know how degraded it is and how well the tie had been stored, because of course 71 they didn't do DNA testing for crime, right? That was still a new technology. But no, I honestly, that's a good question. I think the tie was released externally sometime after 2012 when they started releasing the documents publicly. I don't know if the tie is back in the FBI's hands. I would imagine it is. But it had been handed over at least once to someone, and maybe more than once. I'm not positive. So if they were able to get the money to do a private lab to do the DNA search or test, I would be happy to hand over DNA from myself or my mom. She's still living. I just don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. Is it 3 FBI agents' DNA that's on that tie? Whose DNA is on the tie? We don't know.
So, in your opinion, does it really matter at this point in time if your uncle was D.B. Cooper or not?
I don't think it matters from a policing law enforcement standpoint. I don't think it really matters anymore who did the crime. Whoever did it is dead. I really do believe it was Walt. And what I would want to know, because I just asked my mom this the other day, because there's been a lot of activity in a certain group that I follow, and I called her up, and they can get pretty, mean-spirited, not just towards me, towards anybody who doesn't agree. Certain people, if you don't agree with them or you're out there doing something they don't agree with, they attack. You know how people online can be.
Oh, I sure do.
So I asked my mom, I said, Mom, because she doesn't want anybody to know about this. She thinks it's besmirks the family name, and she thinks nobody should even know it's possibly Walt. But I said, do you think he'd lie to us? Do you think, because we talked him out of signing the confession. We talked him out of it. We just thought he'd go to jail. And she said, no, he wouldn't lie. And my mom and we talked about this last time. They have quite the background together. Right. But I think as far as your question's concerned, for me, if he wasn't, because also we hired, Vern Jones, who published Carl Lauren's book about Waltz being D.B. Cooper and all of that. Joe Koenig was hired to investigate all of us to see if we are telling the truth, if we have, weird backgrounds that make us, creating a conspiracy or lying. And Vern listened to and then transcribed the recorded interviews between Carl and my uncle.
Okay, we're going to have a bit of a cliffhanger here when we come back.
Okay.
Let's talk about those recordings. Lisa Story is my special guest this hour, X-Zone, and if you'd like to find out more about Lisa as well as this story, visit her online at facebook.com/DB Cooper Story. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and Lisa and I will be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone, as the X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. until midnight on your hometown radio, Classic 1220.
I swear by the moon and the stars in the skies, and I swear like the shadow that's by your side. I see the questions in your eyes. I know what's weighing on your mind. You can be sure I know my part, 'cause
We're talking about the D.B. Cooper case this hour, X-Zone Nation. Our guest is Lisa Story, and Lisa is the niece of one of the people who, in fact, told his niece that he was, in fact, D.B. Cooper. First of all, Lisa, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's a great story, and, you know, here we are 52 years later.
Right.
We
still don't know. And
Yeah.
people are still asking so many questions. And there's no hard evidence. There are so many facts that weren't properly recorded.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to go back to what you asked me about. Why at this point does it matter if the case is solved?
Yes.
And for me, what I would want to know is why would Walt think he was Cooper? Because Joe Koenig, who has written a book and has the transcript, including all the warts, and even including the things that some of the D.B. Cooper experts use against my uncle as a suspect, because, you know, we put everything in there to be completely honest. He was a Michigan State police officer who was the lead investigator on the Jimmy Hoffa case. He's an FBI trained forensic linguist, and he now has he's retired, but he now has his own business. And he listened to the recording several times. He did a look at the transcript, and there he determined, based on his 40-year career, that Walt and Carl were being very truthful, and that Walt believed the truth he was telling in those tapes. And he, you know, when he couldn't remember something, Carl would say, "What about this?" And he's like, "Carl, I was in an extreme state of anxiety and fear. I don't remember." And, but he determined that Walt believed he was D.B. Cooper. Now, there's a difference between you believe you're telling the truth and you did something, right?
Yes, that's right.
So that goes back to me wondering, why would he believe it was? Why would he tell my mom and I, along with other things he said he did, like he shot Abu Duwad, and he had an original newspaper clipping from that assassination, and his passport aligns to being in Poland at the time because he spoke fluent Russian and Polish, right? And so I would then want to know, was he part of one of those CIA operations in the 70s and 80s that we've found out about? Not MK Ultra, because they were using LSD, and I don't think my uncle was ever on LSD, but they were really trying to do mind control back then. And it's really interesting. I have found several FBI documents where there are men seen the night of the hijacking that were in suits and nothing else, in inclement weather, walking in strange places. Like, there was a guy walking along the road in the middle of nowhere in a suit, soaking wet, no coat, in Woodland, I think it was. And then the other one is Ellensburg, which is just about 15 miles from where my uncle thought he landed. So, or Carl traced down to where he landed, and he found the eyewitness who made the phone call. And, you know, Joe has interviewed him and determined he's telling the truth. So I guess for me, what would be interesting is that would take the story and my research in a whole different area. Although, because I have the KGB ID and some of these other papers and documents, my youngest brother's telling me I'm crazy and to let it go, or I'm going to end up flying out of a 7-story building, you know. So I don't know. But I would just wonder then why, because he wasn't somebody who bragged. You know, a lot of people are telling me your uncle was just telling a good bar story, and I'm like, that was not him. Like when it came to telling you things that were any story, he underplayed it, and other people that were there had to add the color and, and stuff. And he'd just chuckle like, oh yeah, I remember that. Or he would add a sentence or two, but it was very abrupt and short. Now, he wouldn't exaggerate and go on and on and on about something.
Let me ask you this. Were the FBI aware that your uncle had KGB credentials?
We had, my mom and I had dinner with our former neighbor and a retired FBI agent in 2016, right after, like a couple weeks after they closed the case.
Right.
I showed her the KGB ID. I gave her all of his U.S. Foreign Service passport, IDs, showed her the passports where he'd been all over the world, his military papers, and the confession. And she said, I'm retired, but it is professional courtesy if one FBI agent sends this to another FBI agent. So she sent she said, I know these people. They are not crackpots. They are very sincere. They believe that their relative may be the hijacker. Here's his confession. Here's their contact information. And she was so furious because the person she sent it to in the Portland FBI office sent it back unopened and said, we close the case. I'm not interested unless they have one of the $20 bills or the parachute.
Is it possible that this case was dropped because it was a matter of national security?
That could be. And I've done FOIA requests to the CIA, but I doubt I'll find anything out, right? About my uncle. I don't know if you can tie it. But it could be because maybe this was some type of training exercise or something. I don't know. It was a weird time in our country. And the fact that the money was never found, the body was never found, and then they found those 3 stacks of money, and originally it went on the plane in paper bands, and it was found in rubber bands. Even the bank officer and the flight attendant never said rubber bands. They said it had bank-type bands with printing on it. It's just all very odd. The whole case is very odd.
Now, did the bank know? Well, first of all, how did he get the money? Where did the money come from? Did the airline have to go out and get the money in order to proceed with the hijacking?
So there were a lot of hijackings and kidnappings back then. So the bank, Seattle First National Bank, had money put aside, like $250,000 put aside for such a case. So they just pulled $200,000, put it in a duffel bag.
Right.
Or canvas bag and sent it to the airport. Of course, Northwest Airlines had to call the FBI, who had to arrange all this, right? How they do that.
And this is what I was getting at. Usually, when there's a ransom or an amount of money that is required for, a payment for a criminal activity, every serial number is noted. Plus, they usually throw in a couple of die packs.
This might have been before die packs, but there was no die pack. But what I will tell you is the serial numbers were non-sequential, and they were, they filled single space type, they filled 34, 35 pages. So even in the FBI documents, it said they gave the serial numbers to the banks and they published it in the newspapers.
Right.
But they knew it was nearly impossible to find that money. A lot of people say, that the fact that the money was never found in circulation means it wasn't spent. Baloney. You're talking about, even the FBI wrote that there's no way that a bank teller is going to flip through
a
36-page list of serial numbers and that are not in sequence. They're all over the map.
Yeah.
So there was no way back then. This was before computers, really. So I think the money is the easiest thing to get away with spending, as long as you didn't go in somewhere and plop down $200,000.
Well, if your uncle was that well connected, he could easily have had channels to wash the money.
Well, and that's what he said.
Yeah.
Once he started going back and forth to Idaho, his recruiter Phil hooked him up with somebody, and they did launder the money.
So if he was in contact with a CIA recruiter, then to me it doesn't seem very hard to connect the dots, especially if the CIA recruiter actually set him up for the laundering of the money, that this was in fact an operation that had something to do with the CIA.
Yeah, and I have names in his notebooks and stuff that I have been able to tie. One of the names I've been able to tie to the CIA publicly, somewhat. The other person, it's I haven't been able to, and so because there was nothing public, I don't want to say his name
Of
or
course.
anything. But I think I have a lot of information that if I had the right resource, I could probably connect the dots a little bit better. But then again, maybe it's national security and it shouldn't be connected. I don't know. It's been 52 years. I don't know if it really matters. Those people that he was interacting with certainly are not still alive, I wouldn't imagine.
Right. So where do you see going with this case now? Like you said, it's over 52 years, and
So I finished my memoir where I put snippets of letters from him and myself and him to my daughters and Carl's letters to me and the craziness of when I went to CooperCon and I thought everybody would be interested in his story, but they weren't. And I've put that in a memoir called Better Dead Than Poor. And I just handed it to an editor over the weekend. And I'll try to find a publisher. If I can't, I'll just self-publish, and I'm going to put the story out there and move on with my life. And I think it's time. It's been 10 years since he passed. I've really looked into a lot and discovered so much about his life. But I also feel like it's time for me to have my own adventures and bury his.
yeah, because you were saying before that there's certain members of your family who basically want you to stop it.
Yeah, my mom's just not thrilled about. She really does believe he's Cooper, and she knows firsthand about some of the things he's done in his life that were very dangerous lifestyle, very dangerous work, and criminal activities, right? But she just doesn't think it's anyone's business. And it doesn't do anybody any good to know if it's him or not anyway, so.
Let sleeping dogs lie.
Correct.
Lisa, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. Tell our listeners how they can find out more about you. And do me a favor, when your book comes out, let us know. We'll have to get you back on the show.
Oh, that would be great. I appreciate that. For now, just Facebook, DB Cooper Story. I put photos and bits of my uncle's letters, his KGB ID photos up there. Some of his military photos are up there. I try to tie the dots with the FBI documents and how it relates to him, and try to pull that story together visually for people. But it's just where I have things right now. I don't have a website yet.
Lisa Story, thank you so much for joining us. And man, you've done one heck of a job.
Oh, thank you. And thanks, Rob. I'm so glad you're healthy.
Thank you. Take care of yourself, Lisa. Speak to you soon.
too.
Bye-bye now.
All right.
Hey, Exo Nation, my guest this hour has been Lisa Story. And wow, the name of the website is facebook.com DB Cooper Story. Now, I'll be back tomorrow night at 10 o'clock as once again we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard, and we're here with you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. until midnight. So until tomorrow night, my good friends of the Exo Nation, remember, always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.